As 2023 draws to a close, we take a look at two giants of Southern college football, Georgia athletic director and former football coach Wally Butts, and late Alabama football coach Bear Bryant, and their libel suits against the Saturday Evening Post magazine. Welcome to another edition of Saturday Sportsline Memories. Butts died 50 years ago in 1973. Bryant died 40 years ago in 1983, and the 1963 Post article, now 60 years old, along with the subsequent controversy and libel trial, cast a shadow upon Butts' legacy especially. The magazine alleged that Butts had conspired with Bryant to, quote-unquote, fix the results of the Alabama-Georgia football game in 1962. Both Butts and Bryant sued the magazine for libel and won their cases. The Saturday Evening Post appealed twice, losing both appeals, the final one having the United States Supreme Court uphold the original and appeals court rulings against the magazine. In 2018, Dr. David Sumner, professor emeritus of journalism at Ball State University, published a book about the matter entitled Fumbled Call, the Bear Bryant-Wally Butts football scandal that split the Supreme Court and changed American libel law. The book is an exhaustively researched and highly readable work which serves as the authoritative word on college football's most notorious scandal in the 20th century. On Friday, December 22, 2023, I discussed the book and the issues it raised with Dr. Sumner. Went into the book holding some assumptions that I'd heard over the years, namely Wally Butts was smeared by the Saturday Evening Post, his good reputation sullied, the settlement was partial restitution for the unjust injuries he sustained. But the book helped me see that it really wasn't that simple.
I think, one of the, the preset assumption is, and I heard, I got a lot of objections from his grandchildren and nieces and nephews and so forth. I think if anybody reads the book very carefully, the facts will speak for themselves. I did not put very few of my own personal opinions in the book. Everything I wrote in the book is sourced. I got from archival primary source documents at the University of Georgia archives, where particularly the president of the university's papers, as well as the papers of one of the former editors of the Saturday Evening Post, left all of his papers to the at the Emory University archives. But if you read exactly, particularly if you read exactly what George Burnett wrote in his notes, and those notes, I have actual photo reproductions of the conversation, the 16-minute conversation he overheard between Butts and Bryant. It's hard to believe anything else. The two coaches argued and testified in their trial statements on the witness stand that they had just both of them denied remembering the conversation that they had on that night of September 15th, 1962. It was a 16, 17-minute conversation. But if you read the notes, I'm going to quote from the notes that George Burnett wrote on that conversation. Slot or wide slot to a goal line. Can't quit. Split right in, out. Long count, left half in motion. Onside guard, pulls on sweep. Right half back on fly. That doesn't sound like general football conversations. That sounds very specific. And the other thing, this is all information that Wally Butts gave to Bear Bryant. Bear Bryant didn't give any information about Alabama's plays or strategies or nothing. Secondly, one of the book chapters in my book is about the Georgia Attorney General's investigation, and that was not allowed as evidence in the trial. I mean, don't ask me why, but the judge would not allow it as evidence. But what it said, and I'm going to quote from it, the conversation with, or what was overheard being given by Butts was not casual in nature. It related to football plays, formations, and patterns, and was of vital concern and importance in respect to the offensive and defensive plays, formations, and patterns of the Georgia football team, which could have definitely affected the outcome of the score with reference to points and margin of victory or defeat. The evidence clearly indicates it was not casual and general football conversation. And the other thing, set of facts to look at, and again, I'm just quoting from the trial transcript. I read the trial transcript. The president of the university, 5 members of the faculty athletic board, the head coach, the new head coach of Georgia, and 2 assistant coaches were all defense witnesses. They all testified against Butts. Now, the judge would not allow them to say a lot. All they could say, do you believe, now this is the faculty members and the president, they could only say, what do you believe is Wally Butts' general reputation in the community? Is it good or bad? They all said bad. They couldn't elaborate, but they all said bad. And the other question that the attorney asked him was, do you believe that would you believe Wally Butts under oath? And they all said no. All 6 of them said no. So a lot of the evidence was, now I don't come out and say this. I just present this all out as facts. And you can draw your conclusion, but obviously I'm stating my opinion right now in this conversation. But the people that knew him best testified against him in the trial.
Well, and I happen to agree with that opinion. As I say, I'd held some assumptions before that the book, which is very well researched and very readable, changed my mind over, and people who might be listening who are Crimson Tide or Bulldog fans might not be too happy with this, but the evidence is the evidence. And so one thing that really stood out to me, Dr. Sumner, was the obfuscations or apparent obfuscations that Wally Butts and Bear Bryant engaged in on the stand. And this is only speculation on my part, but it almost seems as if because they were both diagramming plays and insisting that, well, I don't remember the conversation, but I guess it took place because the record said it did. It almost seems to me, and we'll never know, but it feels as if they may have, before the trial got started, conversed either by phone or in person and basically said, look, we're going to be called. This is what we're going to say. Let's get our story straight.
Absolutely. There was a somewhat mysterious meeting held about a week before the trial. Butts and Bryant and the president of the University of Alabama, we don't know anything that was said in that conversation. There was no record of it, but we all know, they got together several days before the trial, and that's probably what they were doing, was collaborating each other.
I want to talk a little bit about the legacies of both men. Wally Butts, for younger people, was a very successful head coach at the University of Georgia, and when all of this occurred back in 62 and 63, he had been basically forced out of his football coaching position and then assumed the athletic director position. Bear Bryant at the time was the coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide. I think that Bear Bryant's legacy seems to be secure. He seemed to be escaping unscathed out of all this, but in my mind, Wally Butts' legacy is somewhat in shadows because of all this.
Uh, Correct. Yeah. And Bear Bryant um, settled. He was sued in a separate case, and the trial would have been held about 6 months later. He settled out of court for $300,000. Um, that was a suspicious settlement. There are reasons to believe that he was pressured to settle by his own attorneys because there was new evidence that had come to the forefront that could have been more implicated him more directly. Um, but his legacy, certainly, he was the most winning coach, had the highest winning record of any coach in the nation until 1982, until his record was, he became the most winning coach in 1982. Before that, the most winning coach was Amos Alonzo Stagg, my next book was a biography of Amos Alonzo Stagg, who was not involved in any controversies like that. He was a very positive and inspiring man.
Well, yes, and I'm hoping that later on here for our listeners, we can talk about that book. 2025 is the 100th anniversary of his passing. I certainly want to interview you before 2025, however, but he is a giant in the game. I wanted to veer off a little bit and just get your opinions on this, Dr. Sumner. It seems because U.S. Supreme Court libel law, it's harder now out of the laws that arose from the Supreme Court after this case and several others. It's harder for public figures to win libel suits. And do you think that's encouraged on the part of the media more lax fact-checking standards in favor of rushing a sensationalistic story out there in the hopes of catching more eyeballs?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's gone too far. I mean, I think the rule that you're referring to is the New York Times versus Sullivan, and it's called the actual malice. And that means that if you publish negative information about a public figure, it's not, you have to prove that the paper knew it was false and published it anyway. I think the Post published this whole story in good faith. I don't think there was any actual malice in this case. And that was, by the time it went to the Supreme Court in 1968, that was what they argued, that there was no actual malice. But they still barely lost that case 5-4.
Dr. Sumner, is there anything else here that you would like to add in regard to the book, the case, the legacy, anything else regarding Butts, Bryant, and the so-called fumbled call?
Well, it was a pleasure writing the book. I got, after I got in, I had some difficult conversations with Butts' relatives after it was published. And, one of the criticisms I got from them was, well, you didn't interview any of the family for the book. Well, the reason I didn't, that none of the family that I talked to, nieces and nephews, were living at the time, or if they were living, they were only small children. And so I had access to primary source documents and witnesses from people who were there at the time, saw what was happening, and knew some of the players, the coaches involved. And another criticism I got about it was I was writing a bit about a dead man who couldn't defend himself. And my answer to that is, Wally Butts had a whole chapter devoted to his day in court. Actually, it was a day and a half in court. And 16 pages of said word for word actually what he said in the court in his own defense. So the reader can decide for himself or herself for that. But I'm committed to absolute truth. and all the writing I did. And I changed my opinion of this case after I was, before I started researching this. I had the same opinion you did and that many people did about the Butts Bryant case. But I read, first of all, I read the book that was published 12 years earlier by the Vanderbilt law professor who, James Curry, who also witnessed. He sat through the whole trial, and he pretty much had the same conclusions that I did. I wrote my book because I thought I could tell it a little bit better, more in a narrative fashion, and he wrote it more like a lawyer, more of a legal analysis of the case. So I stand behind everything I said in the book. It's based on documented sources and the original primary sources, the legal documents, the correspondence, the papers of the editors, the correspondence and papers of the editors, as well as those of the president of the University of Georgia, who was very involved in the controversy at the time.
And which I think makes it the authoritative book on this whole matter. Again, the book is called Fumbled Call, the Bear Bryant Wally Butts football scandal that split the Supreme Court and changed American libel law. The author is Dr. David E. Sumner, Professor Emeritus at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. Dr. Sumner, why don't you tell our listeners how they can obtain a copy of the book?
Well, the book is called Fumbled Call. Just Google Fumbled Call and my name. You can buy it on Amazon for $29.95. You can also buy it at McFarlandBooks.com for $29.95. The same price. That was my publisher. I always try to steer people to the McFarlandBooks.com because Amazon takes a 40% cut out of the price before any of us get anything, either the publisher. So I try to steer them to McFarland. But either way, that's fine. Just go to Amazon or any online bookstore. You can find it all over the net at Target and Walmart. Other places sell it as well. But the earlier book was just called Fumble. And this had a somewhat similar title, but I called it Fumbled Call because it references the telephone call between Butts and Bryant that they kind of fumbled, I believe.
It's a very appropriately titled book. Dr. Sumner, thank you very much for your time. Merry Christmas, and I look forward to talking to you on a future episode of Saturday Sportsline Memories about the Amos Alonzo Stagg book.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate your interest in the book and in talking with me.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sumner. Happy holidays.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.